Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We're going to be talking with Deb Rudnick of EcoAdapt about sea level rise in Bainbridge Island. But first, I want to mention that Something to Talk About is a podcast sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island here at the Bainbridge Island Senior and Community Center. Fieldstone offers assisted independent living and memory care communities on Rolling Bay. You can find out about what they have to offer and get a tour by contacting Randy O'Neill or Sierra Wood. Their phone number is 206-594-1010. You can also ask about day stay and respite care programs. Their website is fieldstonecommunities.com. And we would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the ancestral homeland of the Suquamish, the people of the clear salt water, who have lived here since time immemorial. We honor them, and we are learning, or we should be learning, from their stewardship of these lands and waters, which is stewardship is one of the things that we're here to talk a little bit about, and also thinking about how to respond to what's already underway thanks to climate change and our behavior over the past centuries. Deb, thank you very much for joining us. You're a senior scientist with EcoAdapt. Can you tell us a little bit about the project, and then we'll get into your latest report?
Sure. Yeah. So welcome, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. Thumbs up or nod if you can hear me okay and see my screen that I'm supposed to be sharing right now. Excellent. Okay, good. Yes, as Reed mentioned, I'm the senior scientist, or a senior scientist with EcoAdapt. We are a nonprofit organization that works in the climate change adaptation space, and I will get into that a little bit more when I start my presentation. But we've been working on this project with the community here for about 3 years. Reed kindly invited us soon after we started to talk a little bit about what we were doing, what our plans were, and now has invited us back. So I'm happy to be here to kind of give an update on the things we've been working on, and they are manyfold. So the things I'm going to walk through with you today, I'll do a little bit of an introduction about why is sea level rise important for an island community. That might be self-evident to you, but we can talk about that a little bit. And then I'm going to dive into some of the things that EcoAdapt has been working on around this issue of sea level rise. I want to finish up by talking about kind of two things that anyone and everyone is encouraged to get involved in. Both there are city and county processes going on right now around conducting vulnerability assessments for the island and the county with respect to sea level rise. And then next spring, we will be hosting an environmental conference at Islandwood that is focused on sea level rise. So I'll touch on both those things, and then hopefully we'll have time for some Q&A at the end. So if that sounds good, I'll start just by introducing us. So the main folks that have been involved with this project are myself and my executive director, Laura Hansen, who runs EcoAdapt. Both of us are actually based here, live here on Bainbridge Island. I've lived here for 23 years now. And so this is a meaningful project for us because we both live in this community and care a lot about what happens to it. And we've been supported in this work by our wonderful Civic Sparks fellow, who's been with us for 2 years, and we're all going to cry, but is leaving us next month to do a master's degree in GIS in the UK, but has been absolutely wonderful, Daniela Rolla. So she's been supporting us on this project as well. So I mentioned I'm with EcoAdapt. EcoAdapt is very simply interested in figuring out how do we support as robust a future as we can, given the fact that we are facing climate change and the many challenges it brings. And we do this in a whole number of ways. So we work on Bainbridge Island, but we also work nationally and internationally on climate change adaptation. And the place we function is really in providing support, providing science, providing training and assistance to help make planning and management less vulnerable. And that means we work with a whole variety of different organizations and jurisdictions all across the country and across the world, as I mentioned, helping them think about how do I better integrate climate science and thinking about climate vulnerabilities into the work I'm already doing, whatever that means for them. It could be with respect to their water resources or their road infrastructure or housing development. It can mean a whole host of things depending on the community that we're working with to try to help them figure out how to better adapt to and be resilient to climate change. So that is us on a broad level. Now, sea level rise is the issue we're talking about today. And obviously, we're on an island. Not only are we on an island, we're on an island with a lot of coastline. So Bainbridge has about 53 miles of coastline. Some of that coastline is very low lying. Other parts of that coastline has pretty steep bluffs and things that are vulnerable to erosion. So there's a number of different parts of our island that are vulnerable in different ways to sea levels rising over time. And as I mentioned, both the city and the county are starting to talk about sea level rise and look at it, conducting what's called vulnerability assessments. So to figure out, and they're very focused on, city and county assets, the things they have control over, things like sewer systems and roads and utilities. They're interested in assessing what is the risk over time to all these public assets, and what does that mean in terms of how they need to start thinking about handling them. But in addition to all the kind of jurisdictional and government stuff that needs to happen around sea level rise, there's also this whole portion of it that is you and me. Many of us live on or near a shoreline, or we use roads on shorelines to get around. And the planning that and the responses we're going to have to make to sea level rise are going to require us to be engaged and informed. And that's what we're really interested in with this work. So I've put a QR code in the corner there, and Reed, I can get you kind of these links afterwards that we could share with people if that works.
Yeah, so I just wrote that link down, and if you're listening to this or watching it later, it's going to be in the description box accompanying the video or audio.
Great. So when I show codes like that further on as well, I'll just send you all those links, Reed, so we can make sure that they're available for folks. Thank you. Okay, so when we started thinking about sea level rise on Bainbridge Island, the first thing we wondered is, well, what do people think about this issue? Are they thinking about this issue? Is this something that's important to them? It seemed really important to get kind of a baseline. And so we conducted a survey a couple of years ago. It was online, and it was sent out through a whole variety of channels, social media and partners, and I think even the senior center sent it out. And we put it in the schools and asked teachers to share it with their students. So in a whole different bunch of ways, we reached out to the community, and we got about 400 folks responding, which was great. And what we learned from that was that, well, for one, we had a pretty diverse set of respondents. We had a mix of ages respond, from students through retired folks. And we had a mix of where folks live. So about 2/3 of our respondents did not live on the shoreline, and about 1/3 of them did. And in different parts of the island, and how long they'd live here. So we felt like this was a pretty representative sample, which was nice, of kind of the spread of folks across Bainbridge Island. And the other outcome of this is we learned that by and large, the majority of folks on this island are already think that sea level rise is a concern, or if it's not a concern right now, it's going to be in the near future. There's a pretty high level of awareness about this issue, and I don't think we should be shocked given this is an island community. And the results of that outcome were pretty consistent, no matter whether or not it was folks living on the shoreline, away from the shoreline, regardless of age. These results were pretty consistent. So that was a good place to start, because we knew that folks were already kind of interested in this issue and aware that it was a concern. So from there, we also did kind of a little bit of a follow-up survey. where we just asked an open-ended question about kind of, well, what do you think we should do in the face of sea level rise? What are some of the ways the community can respond? Should we respond? And so from the responses we got back from that, we kind of grouped them together in different kind of categories that made some sense to us. The nice news is that there are very few respondents who thinks we should do nothing, which is, I think, a positive response, because doing nothing is probably not going to help us. There were some responses around increasing shoreline armoring. There were some around decreasing shoreline armoring. This makes a lot of sense because people are kind of in different places about what protecting shorelines means to them, and it's an area I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, because that's a really important conversation to have. And then there were just a lot of really interesting responses and kind of priorities for folks around, well, what can we do proactively? Things like creating what's called a living shoreline that helps respond to climate change, or thinking about the way we incentivize or prevent development in areas that might be particularly susceptible to sea level rise. So this was great, and it kind of gave us a sense of where people might be coalescing around some ideas. And we also were really happy to see that there was a lot of responses that were very cognizant. They really were aware that reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is what we call climate mitigation, so actually reducing the problem, or the cause of the problem of climate change, that's really important to a lot of people. And we said, yay, because you don't want to just be reactive. We also want to be proactive. We want to be doing whatever we can to actually also reduce the impacts from kind of the cause side. So that was great to gather that information. And we use that kind of as a launching pad for what we call community conversations, which we started last year and we're continuing. And this was really where, and a lot of this came out of our survey. So we did identify folks who are willing to tell us kind of where on the island they lived. And we targeted some neighborhoods we knew that might be particularly vulnerable to sea level rise. So low-lying shoreline neighborhoods. And we reached out and said, hey, do you want to get your neighbors together and kind of have a longer conversation about this? So that's what we've done. We've done 4 or 5 of these at this point around the island. And I'm going to walk through with you kind of a mini version of some of the things that we touch on when we do this kind of neighborhood conversation. They all look a little different. I mean, you can expect that because every neighborhood kind of has its own topography and its own priorities and thoughts around kind of what they need to do in order to prepare. We are open to hosting more of these, and we do bring awesome cookies from Blackbird Bakery. They special order made these wave cookies for us, so I was really excited about that. So we bring cookies with us.
That's pretty cool.
Thank you. It's a nice incentive. People really like the cookies. Okay, so when we have a conversation with like specific neighborhoods on the island, we start with some visualizations. They look different for every neighborhood, but they all start, we use what's called the NOAA Sea Level Rise Viewer. And this is a public data set. Anybody can go on this website. I'll share this with you, Reed, and look up sea level rise scenarios for Bainbridge Island. What it does is it kind of groups together a bunch of climate projection and expected sea level rise data. It uses Seattle. You can see kind of, it's in this map, it's on the right, highlighted. It's called like sort of a Seattle scenario. That's the closest place where the projections are kind of being forecast, and then it extrapolates it out to our island. So these are pretty specific to our region. Sea level rise is going to look a little bit different depending on where you are in the country, and there's a number of reasons for that. In our area, it can be very geologically complex because we have areas of Puget Sound and the coast that are doing different things in response. We're still kind of coming out of the glaciation period. And in some ways, we have parts of this area that are doing a little bit of, the land is still rising a bit out on the coast. And then we have some areas where the land is subsiding more. And it also depends on kind of the development we're doing and whether or not that's contributing to subsidence as well. So like reduction in height relative to sea level. So,
And of course, water
yeah,
has its own weight.
uh-huh, absolutely.
So that's
Yes,
all part of it. Yeah, I can see.
absolutely. It's all part of it. It's complicated, but we can get pretty close these days and pretty good with the projections using these models. It's a good way to kind of try to visualize. It's hard to visualize some of this stuff because you're not quite seeing it yet. As a way to help folks visualize, one of the things we like to do is think about king tides, because king tides, really today's king tides, the super high tides that tend to happen in the winter. And we had, if anybody recalls being here in 2022, we had some really incredible king tides. And they did things like completely flood some of our coastal roads. They totally inundated the maintenance ferry yard. And, you know, they, over time, these really high floods can cause road damage. They certainly can influence people's houses when they're low lying. There's places where, you know, active sandbagging had to occur, or people weren't able to get into their road, or whatever the case may be. Today's king tides are what we like to say is kind of tomorrow's sea level rise. So if you think about something that happens once a year, might be something that's happening monthly or weekly or more frequently, depending where you are and how low lying you are. So it's kind of a glimpse into the future of sea level rise, and a way to think about what do we need to do to prepare. The other thing is, it's not just infrastructure, it's not just property, it's also ecology, because our natural areas, obviously, the way in which the sea level is intersecting with our natural areas is going to change over time. Sea levels are rising and they're also moving further inward. And that means there's going to be changes happening in our parks, our shoreline park systems as well. And we talk a lot about the idea that you have to have room for habitat to move back, because if they're squished, if you have a nice beach, but it's squished up, you know, people's homes are right behind it and there's nowhere for it to go, you will lose that beach system over time, or you will lose that marsh habitat over time if it doesn't have anywhere to migrate and to move. And then there's a whole other set of very interesting and sometimes complicated intersections with groundwater sea level rise. And that's a whole conversation we can have as well, about how as sea level rises, it actually pushes in on the fresh water of Bainbridge Island. And that can be really meaningful, especially if people have wells that are near the shoreline that might be impacted by sea level rise. So this is sort of the stuff we go through with neighborhood conversations. And we also talk a little bit about, and I mentioned this along the way, but it's really important to understand there's kind of two parts to climate change. We should be mitigating, which means we're reducing emissions. And then we should be adapting, which is the types of things that we're talking about in conversation. What do we do to respond and prepare? And there's a host of examples out there, and they run the gamut from extremely high, extremely hard, extremely severe, and extremely protective measures you can take. So seawalls are a great example of that. You know, to things that are maybe more flexible and working with the fact that sea level is rising. So in the lower left corner, there's a picture here of a house that is on Murden Cove that was built fairly recently. And it was actually built to be inundatable, because its bottom floor is open and it's simply concrete. So it can actually withstand occasional inundation. And there's more and more examples of this happening around the world. You know, you can think of houses that are on stilts in coastal communities in other areas because they're very much used to dealing with this. This is sort of like a harder version of that.
Yep, we have one on Holly Cove.
Yes, that was just renovated, right, and lifted.
Yep.
Another great example. Thank you. Yeah. So there's sort of these physical things you can do, and then there's all this host of other things we can and should be doing. And I mentioned it as one of like many of the things people mentioned when they were talking about like what do they think we should do? Policies, fiscal tools, incentivizing people, not disincentivizing people. There's a range of opportunities here for us to think about how we plan in a way that doesn't get us into more trouble with respect to sea level rise.
So one of the examples you have here
Yeah.
is tight line. Can you say
Yeah.
a little bit about what that is?
Mm-hmm. I can. So tight lining is this idea where you are trying to get water off a slope. And this is important for a couple of reasons that it relate to climate change. One is when you have sea level rise, you have more erosion potentially happening at the base of a cliff or a high bluff. And the other is with climate change, the other thing we know that's going on is that we're going to probably have wetter, more extreme event winters with more water associated with them. And when you have a very high or unstable shoreline, water sitting on top of that and not being removed as quickly as possible can also contribute to erosion and even cliff collapse. So this is an engineering technique to make sure we're moving water as quickly and efficiently off the surface as possible as another potential adaptation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So lots of things. And, depending on the community we're talking to, some of these things are more or less relevant because it's all pretty localized. Um, as part of these community conversations, one of the things that we realized was happening as well is we got a lot of questions around certain issues, which is completely to be expected. So over the course of this work, we've also developed a couple of resources that we can share with people as handouts. These are available on our website. I'll share those links with you. We completed one on shoreline armoring because there's a lot of questions around does shoreline armoring help or hurt? And the answer is really it does depend, but there's a lot of ways in which shoreline armoring can be impactful. And unfortunately, with sea level rise, it often does not help because the sea does not care if your wall is there. It will come over it or around it or underneath it anyway. And so we are certainly going to face some difficult decisions for folks as they're figuring out kind of how to respond to that. And there's some really good resources, and we pulled from other resources that have been developed in this region, like the Department of Fish and Wildlife. They have an excellent handout on kind of different shoreline responses, and we took some of that information from there. But these are just like some different ways to think about protecting versus in some cases, are we going to have to move back from? Are there cases where we need to actually pull back from the shoreline because there's nothing we can do about the water coming in and our house or property will not continue to exist or it will be at risk. So there's lots of different things to think about here. So that's one of the resources we developed. And then we also developed a resource on septic systems and climate change because people had a lot of questions about this, and it's a great question, and it's something that I think as a county and as Puget Sound we're still trying to get our heads around. In fact, the county right now is embarking on kind of a mapping of septic systems around the county shoreline to even understand what the level of risk is and what level of support might they need to provide to people who are trying to figure out, do I need to move my septic system, change my septic system, abandon my septic system? There's a lot of questions around that. So this was a resource we developed with a cute little name, Septic System and Climate Change. What can we do? To talk a little bit, just get people aware of kind of like what are the different ways in which climate change can affect your septic systems. What are warning signs to look for, and when do you need to start thinking about what do I need to do next with respect to kind of septic system maintenance and longevity.
Yeah, I see on this chart that you have shown that
Yeah.
both wetter winters, so
Yes.
both more water,
Yes.
and drier summers, more heat and drought,
Yeah.
both can have negative effects on your functioning of your septic system.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the challenge of this. It's not just one thing. And then of course sea level rise is a whole nother thing. But even for folks who are not near the shoreline, climate change is likely to bring other changes that could affect your septic system function. And I should mention, it's cut off at the bottom, but we are really happy to have Kitsap Public Health review this for us. So they've actually had input into this handout as well, and hopefully we'll be using it as a resource. Yeah, so that in a nutshell is kind of some of the work we've been doing around having those neighborhood conversations. And I encourage people, please reach out if that's something that you think that might be of interest to your neighborhood. Another thing I want to touch on, a different way to kind of help people think more about sea level rise, is a set of projects we've been doing around visualization of sea level rise. So I mentioned how this can be kind of hard to visualize because we can't peer into the future. We don't have a crystal ball. The best thing we do have is climate change projections, which are a pretty good model for where things may go with some uncertainty, especially as we look farther out. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But we've been trying to think about different kind of graphical and interactive ways we can make sea level rise feel more real to folks. So one of the things we've been doing is partnering with the ferries, who've been a wonderful partner, to put in some graphical illustrations at our ferry terminals. We did our first one on Bainbridge. And for this one, we also lucked out in getting to work with Hyla High School because they had a class on climate change and some kids who are really interested in this. So they worked with us to create this kind of graphic. And I put the first panel from this graphic up on the screen, and it just talks about how these panels, and there's three of them, I'll show you in a minute, show sea level in Puget Sound today and under climate change, and about those projections, about looking forward. What is it likely to look at mid-century? What's it likely to look like by the end of the century? And as you'll see, there's more certainty around nearer term projections than longer term. It gets more uncertain and there's more question. And some of that has to do with how many fossil fuels we burn in the immediate future as to how fast sea level rises. So that's where mitigation
Right.
and adaptation absolutely intersect with each other. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we probably, those of us who've taken the ferry, have seen these on the walkway.
Mhm.
And as
Yeah.
you are waiting for the ferry to unload and you're standing there they are, beautiful,
There they
clear.
are.
And
Yep.
and so thank you for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you can use it to spark a conversation on your 35-minute ferry ride or longer, as the case may be these days. This is what they look like in their totality. Yeah, with those three panels I mentioned. And so this, as it says on the first panel, there's no way to do this in a way that like we could actually project this on the shoreline. I wish we could, but it's very complicated by where the walkway sits and the shoreline and everybody's different height. So we basically just went with it's about this much rise over this much time, and did a pretty simple representation. But what we're looking at is about a foot of rise and then 2 to 5 feet of rise. And that's that uncertainty I mentioned. There's a lot more uncertainty as we try to peer farther out into the future as to exactly what we're looking at. And depends on a lot of things, particularly some tipping points, around ice shelf collapse and things like that, they're still kind of unknowns to some extent. But yeah, this is our first attempt at doing this work. And then and these are some of our partners. So Lara and I are standing with the chair of Sustainable Bainbridge, which is one of our partners in this. And then the two young ladies on the right are two of our Hyla High School students who helped. And then Adrienne Stutz is all the way over on the right. She's our WSF biologist who helped coordinate this project with us. So all these partners, the Ferry, Sustainable Bainbridge, EcoAdapt, and Bainbridge Community Foundation, and of course, Hyla, who's on the panel as well. And then, let's see.
Yeah, I feel like this kind of just simple starting point is helpful because the charts can be a little overwhelming.
Yes.
And getting a sense of, okay, so it's 1 or 2 feet or maybe 5.
Yeah.
And then when we walk along the shoreline, we think, okay, that's going to be this far up or this far inland.
Yeah, exactly, Reed. Yeah, thank you. That's what we're hoping for, is to kind of like just make this more concrete. And I'll show you, literally, I'll show you, not to pun, in a minute, an example of that. This is another graphic installation. It looks very similar to the one you just saw. So we just installed this last week on Bremerton's overhead walkway. And as I mentioned, WSF has been a great partner in this work. For this work, Kitsap Community Foundation funded it. And we're excited to do these. We're hoping to do a couple more on a couple other ferry systems. We'll see how it goes, if we can find the funding for it. But speaking of concrete, this is our current project, which hopefully will be installed this fall at Bainbridge Park. So this is a partnership with Bainbridge Island Parks and the Parks Foundation and the Rotary Club, who actually gave us a grant to do this work. We are working with an artist based in the San Juans who is creating a sculptural bench for us that we're hoping will be kind of a more interactive version of visualizing sea level rise. The idea being that you can kind of sit on this bench and you put your feet at current kind of king tide, and then you can think about sitting there and you're sitting about at mid-century sea level, and then you can look up at a column that's next to you that is potentially end of century sea level, which is, we think, a nice way to kind of immerse you in this idea of what does sea level rise really look like in a space. So we are excited to be embarking on this, and the installation is going to happen sometime after Labor Day.
So you've got basically a slab at the bottom that you think is king tide today. And then so it's about 2.5 feet from where that and your bottom is sitting.
Yep.
And then you can look to your left or right, and there's a basalt column there that's going up.
It's going up. Yes. You can think about that as longer term potential sea level rise.
Okay.
Yep. Yes, we actually simplified this a little bit. I don't think the step is in here anymore. We're trying to make things a little bit simpler, but the rest of this, the bench and the basalt column and the slab, are all going to be parts of this. Yeah. So those are the projects that kind of we're working on internally and with the community. But I also wanted to make mention, because it's really important, is that the city and the county, as I said in the beginning, are both kind of in the middle of or just have completed their own vulnerability assessments. And I mentioned these are fairly focused on like city assets and county assets, because obviously that's what city county has control over. But it's super important that we are all looking at these assessments, because they have a lot to say about our roads, our utilities, our sewer systems, and obviously those all intersect with our properties and where we live and how we access things. So both of these resources are available through our website as well. The city has done a very nice story map. It's very engaging and interactive with some good video of king tides. So I recommend checking that out in particular, because that's a nice resource. And the county literally just finished their vulnerability assessment. I haven't even looked at it yet, but it's now available on their website for review as well. So those are both there now. And then the other thing that I think I'm excited about is that the Bainbridge Island Environmental Conference, which is an annual conference that happens, it's happened in a number of different places. Next year is at Islandwood, which is our typical host. But that conference on Sunday, May 29th, is going to be focused on sea level rise. And we are hoping to have some speakers from Washington Sea Grant and some researchers who are doing some really good real-time science and planning around sea level rise to speak about their research and the implications of it for Puget Sound. So we're super excited about that conference and hope you are interested in attending that.
Yes, I feel as though the idea of adaptation is, to start to think about it, as they say about everything regarding planning. You don't know exactly how it's going to work out, but you do know that there's a range of possibilities. And when you start to think about your own property and have time now to consider what the options are.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And yeah, thank you for bringing that up in particular, Reed. I think
and the kind of decisions we're going to have to make, right now we're in that. Yeah, I feel like, these are things that we need to keep in mind for the changes that we'll make to support continued growth, which we know is going to happen on the island.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you bring up two really important points. One is that this island community is going to keep changing. So as that happens, we want to make sure it's happening in a way that works with, not gets in the way of changes we know are coming. And the other piece is, sort of that thinking in advance. What we don't, fortunately, a sea level rise it's not an immediate crisis. It's something that's happening slowly over time. And the unfortunate part of that is it's a little bit of like being the frog in the, proverbial pot of boiling water, which is like, it just gets a little bit worse over time. And then suddenly you're like, how did this happen? Which is not where we want to be, right? We want to be thinking about it as far enough in advance that we are able to prepare and respond and be proactive as opposed to be reactive. And also, one of the things that's really true about this is that because of the scale of it, it's going to cost quite a bit of money. I mean, to change our infrastructure, to think about rerouting things, to think about, some neighborhoods that simply over time may not be viable any longer. This is not cheap. It's not cheap for any. I mean, there are communities in the East Coast that are facing kind of this more immediately. You need time to build up the resources and to think about the capital investments that are going to be involved in doing this work. So, we think it's really good idea to start thinking about it earlier than later, for sure. Yes.
Great.
That is it from me. So I am very happy to take any questions.
Well, I'll start with one. So you mentioned sort of in discussing armoring the shoreline that generally you might find that it is counterproductive, that it might not work, in fact, because the water is stronger than whatever it is, or more invasive than what it is you're trying to put up as a wall to stop it. Yeah. Are there instances where armoring does work or make sense?
I mean, yes. And particularly in the short term, if you're concerned about protecting very high value assets from things like storm surge, which are getting worse over time, and king tides, certainly armoring can buffer against kind of the energy of storm events. The downside of that is oftentimes armoring is very reflective. And so when you are trying to do that work of protecting your property, it sometimes can end up going sideways and affecting your neighbor's property, right? We see this. I love the ferries, so I don't want to make them an example, but a really good example is the Eagle Harbor condos sit right between two armored portions of the ferry's maintenance yard and their facility, right? And they're a little bit getting kind of the pushback from all that reflective energy that comes off of those seawalls. Now, Eagle Harbor condos also has some of their own armoring as well, but like I think that's probably exacerbating a little bit of the erosive force around shorelines. And you see that in a lot of places, like adjacent to a part that is armored, the part next to it tends to be eroded back, and that can actually come around and kind of invade your own seawall over time. So there's lots of complex forces at play. You know, and again, it's like you have to think about kind of how long am I willing to protect this, and how much is it going to take? And eventually, am I going to get to a point where this just doesn't make sense? Because again, the water is just going to come up, over, around, and underneath it. So yeah.
Okay, so it's sort of like timeline as well as situation and
Absolutely.
adjacency. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
there's always going to be some place that isn't armored,
Right.
somewhere
Yep.
down the line,
Yep.
and what you talked about earlier about habitat being severely
Yes.
impacted by
Right.
armoring.
Yes. That is always, yeah. One of the biggest impacts of shoreline armoring is around kind of habitat loss. The scouring that occurs in front of an armored shoreline can be significant. It can change kind of the geomorphology of the beach in front of it pretty significantly. So that's another definite impact that needs to be thought about. Yep.
And as you said, 53 miles of shoreline, there's
Yeah.
a lot of tough thinking about what that means for
Yeah.
property owners and
Yeah.
parkland, and of course,
Yes.
this, as we know, a lot of roads go right
Yes.
along the shoreline.
Correct. Yeah. And that's going to be a big one.
Anybody else have a question or comment? Well, oh yes, Barbara, please unmute and ask away.
Not a question, but a comment. This was just a wonderful overview. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And I
Yeah.
really appreciate how you're focusing on visual representations, because as a visual learner, that really helps me. But we do need to try and imagine what it's going to look like in
Yeah.
20 years or 50 years or whatever. So this is
Yeah.
fabulous work. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm a visual learner too, and so is Laura. So both of us, like, that's where our brain goes immediately. We have to see it.
Mhm.
Yep.
So thank you for sending along the links. And
Yeah,
when I send this out, I will include a panel with those links on it. Really appreciate you taking the time and all the
absolutely.
hard work that EcoAdapt is doing.
Thanks.
We really appreciate it. And yeah, cheers.
Thanks very much.